The U.S. government released what it is calling Phase 1 of a trove of documents related to the investigation of Jeffrey Epstein and those close to him, but the Department of Justice also accused the FBI of hiding key information and set a deadline of 8 a.m. today, Friday morning, to get to the rest of the paperwork. So, what happens next? Should we expect to see more document dumps, and what kind of information could be in them? And what do we know about the people who have already been connected to the infamous pedophile? We're digging into all of it right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It's one of the most prominent conspiracy theories in the United States that wealthy financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein was killed while behind bars to keep him from revealing damning secrets about some very high-profile and high-powered people, right? Now we know Jeffrey Epstein was believed to be the ringleader of a sex trafficking ring that stretched across the globe. He was arrested in 2019 on federal charges of child sex trafficking and conspiracy. And we also know that he died in a Manhattan jail cell with his death ruled a suicide, although there's been a lot of people who have wondered whether that was actually the case. But here's the thing. This release that we actually did an emergency sidebar on last night intended to shed light on Epstein's extensive network and illicit activities, but instead it has sparked a lot of controversy, it has sparked a lot of speculation, more rumors, and in fact, I think the best way to explain it is raise more questions than answers. So, what we're going to do is we're going to dig into what we know and what we don't know and maybe what we can expect. So what do we know? Newly appointed Attorney General Pam Bondi announced Wednesday night on Fox News that the Department of Justice would begin its document release the following day into the Epstein files, the Epstein case. And then what happened on Thursday? First thing, several conservative, maybe you want to call them right-wing influencers and activists, were seen outside the White House holding binders that said, the Epstein Files Phase 1. But then there was a surprising twist when Pam Bondi released a statement, a letter actually, saying that a source within the FBI told her that agents were hiding documents related to Epstein. They didn't turn them over. And that the 200 pages Bondi had been given was really only a small piece of a much larger pile of documentation and evidence. So Pam Bondi releases a letter that she sent to Kash Patel, the new director of the FBI. And it said in part, quote, I repeatedly questioned whether this was the full set of documents responsive to my request and was repeatedly assured by the FBI that we had received the full set of documents. Late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files. When you and I spoke yesterday, you were just as surprised as I was to learn this new information. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, February 28th, which is today, the FBI will deliver the full and complete Epstein files to my office, including all records, documents, audio and video recordings, and materials related to Jeffrey Epstein and his clients, regardless of how such information was obtained. There will be no withholdings or limitations to my or your access. The Department of Justice will ensure that any public disclosure of these files will be done in a manner to protect the privacy of victims and in accordance with law, as I have done my entire career as a prosecutor. I am also directing you to conduct an immediate investigation into why my order to the FBI was not followed. You will deliver to me a comprehensive report of your findings and proposed personnel action within 14 days. So in other words, tell me why this happened, why my order wasn't followed, and I guess the question would be, is anybody going to get fired over this? Now, the release of classified information to the American people, that is reportedly a top priority, one of the top priorities of the current Donald Trump administration, with new documents related to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy Sr., Martin Luther King Jr. They are also expected to be made public. Maybe we'll cover those here on Sidebar as well. But so far, there is no word on whether the FBI met Pam Bondi's deadline. And look, as a matter of law, she is the Attorney General. The FBI, essentially, is under her purview. So there wouldn't really necessarily be a legal justification, just taking this as true, for FBI agents to not comply with a request from the Attorney General. Hey, I got to quickly call out today's sponsor that helped make this episode possible, Saley. Now, if you don't know what Saley is, it is an incredible eSIM service app. So I recently went on vacation to Italy, and Saley is something I could download on my phone because I use so much data while I was away. While everybody else is dealing with roaming fees and having issues with their cell data, you can use Saley as a hotspot to easily plan your activities, like what I did, which was eating pasta and eating pasta and eating more pasta. Now, with the Saley app, getting an eSIM really couldn't be simpler because you just buy a plan on the Saley app, you activate it, and once it's activated, you're good to go. You can use the internet wherever you go. Also, once the Saley eSIM is installed, there's no need to install a new one for each country. The same eSIM can use plans that are available in over 190 countries. So you just got to go to saley.com/sidebar or click the link in the description or pinned in the comments to get an exclusive 15% discount on Saley data plans. Be sure to use our code SIDEBAR at checkout. That is saley.com/sidebar. Promo code SIDEBAR. I spoke with retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt yesterday, Thursday, before the official Phase 1 release about Bondi's accusations against the agency and what evidence could still be forthcoming. Take a look.
If the Attorney General, who has been confirmed by the Senate, says, I need this, that the FBI would say no. That is immediate termination and possible prosecution for obstruction of justice. There's absolutely no reason to do that, number one. Number two, I'm a little frustrated because once again the FBI may have put themselves on the hot seat again inadvertently, and they knew this was coming. I think they should have obviously had everything prepared, had a list of things that were ready to go, and basically communicated with her office and say, okay, this is what we have, this is what we're prepared to release now. That's unredacted, because there is a process of redaction for all those victims. You can't put that out because you're going to put their lives at risk. So there's a lot to unpack here. And frankly, there is a lot of evidence. If it's not there, then that's a whole nother problem. And that's another spate of investigations on why it's not there, because they seized it. You can't give it back. The guy's dead. Who are you going to give it to? You got to have it. If you don't have it, that's a problem. I know the thoroughness of the FBI. If it's there, they would have gotten it unless it's buried in a hole and not a reasonable person would have been able to get to it. So it really comes down to the documents really aren't really going to show much. It's what it's really going to get into is the digital devices, the hard drives, possibly VHS tapes. Those are the things that purportedly were seized that need to be exploited to find out what's on these things. And then at that point, there needs to be a group of people to kind of catalog all of this and make sure Pam Bondi knows exactly what's in the custody of the United States government.
Now, FBI Director Kash Patel released a statement on X, formerly Twitter, saying the FBI is entering a new era, one that will be defined by integrity, accountability, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. There will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, and no stone left unturned, and anyone from the prior or current Bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. If there are gaps, we will find them. If records have been hidden, we will uncover them, and we will bring everything we find to the DOJ to be fully assessed and transparently disseminated to the American people as it should be. The oath we take is to the Constitution, and under my leadership, that promise will be upheld without compromise. Now, people on both sides of the political aisle have cried foul over the Epstein information that did come out Thursday night because we already knew a lot of it already. The information we got included more than 100 pages of flight logs, a contact or address book purportedly belonging to Jeffrey Epstein, a completely redacted list of masseuses, which, by the way, is significant because, as I mentioned in our episode last night, one of the main allegations was that Jeffrey Epstein, through Ghislaine Maxwell, would have young women, girls, come forward, and under the guise of masseuses, he would sexually assault them. Now, there's also a list of some of the items of evidence that were apparently removed from Epstein's residences in New York and the U.S. Virgin Islands. That is new. We hadn't seen that before. That's interesting. But the flight log details some of the passengers who flew with Epstein on the so-called Lolita Express, his private jet, between April 1991 and January 2006. And as noted at the top of the document, that log was a government exhibit. It was publicly released in the court case of United States v. Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell, of course, was convicted of child sex trafficking in 2021. She's currently serving a 20-year sentence in a Florida prison. I will tell you, though, interesting, and this has come up a lot as well, she was convicted of conspiracy charges, but no one else has been charged in connection with the alleged sex trafficking ring. So who are the other alleged co-conspirators? Obviously, Jeffrey Epstein's dead, but that's been a criticism. Now, as I mentioned, these flight logs, these manifests, they had been previously released. Even Business Insider did a piece where they said this is every flight that Jeffrey Epstein had taken. So there wasn't really any bombshell information in there per se, but we went through essentially every page. We highlighted a few of the more interesting passengers, and of course, just being named as a passenger on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet, while that may raise questions, to be very, very, very clear about this, this is not proof of any sort of crime. This is not proof that they were complicit in any alleged illegal wrongdoing or were knowledgeable about what was going on. Got to make that clear. But prominent figures over the years, they have said that they flew with Epstein for business or charity reasons. He was a big financier. For example, former President Bill Clinton. He was listed as a passenger multiple times in 2002 and 2003, apparently accompanied by Secret Service agents. The former president was also mentioned in a deposition transcript, by the way. We might remember that Johanna Schoberg, who says that she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein, testified that she knew Epstein had, quote, dealings with Clinton, but didn't know they were friends until she read a Vanity Fair article talking about them taking trips to Africa together. She also said that Epstein told her that Clinton, quote, liked them young, obviously allegedly referring to young girls, but later in the deposition, Schoberg clarified that she never actually met Bill Clinton, never saw him on the island that Jeffrey Epstein owned, where many of the worst allegations against Epstein reportedly happened. Now, when some of those transcripts and other legal documents started coming out in 2019, a spokesperson for Clinton said, in part, President Clinton knows nothing about the terrible crimes Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty to in Florida some years ago, or those with which he has been recently charged in New York. In 2002 and 2003, President Clinton took a total of 4 trips on Jeffrey Epstein's airplane, 1 to Europe, 1 to Asia, 2 to Africa, which included stops in connection with the work of the Clinton Foundation. Staff, supporters of the foundation, and a Secret Service detail traveled on every leg of every trip, basically suggesting that, of course, there would be nothing nefarious going on if everybody was there. Now, another frequent passenger was current President Donald Trump. His name appears several times in the early 1990s. You have a May 1994 log entry that says Jeffrey Epstein flew with Trump, Trump's then wife Marla Maples, their daughter Tiffany, and Tiffany's nanny. Another time, 1995, Eric Trump was listed as a passenger. Johanna Schoberg also mentioned Trump in her deposition, claiming that she traveled from Florida to Atlantic City with Epstein and went to one of Trump's casinos. And when asked if she ever gave Donald Trump a massage, she said no. And Donald Trump has denied knowing anything about Jeffrey Epstein's crimes or alleged crimes. Another famous name that appears on the flight log is Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, someone who has backtracked a lot about his controversial relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Been in the spotlight quite a bit. We got Alan Dershowitz. His name is on the flight logs several times too. Not shocker. He's the lawyer who actually later helped Epstein secure that sweetheart deal in Florida. Remember, back in the early 2000s, the parents of a 14-year-old girl came forward to the Palm Beach police saying their daughter had been paid to give Jeffrey Epstein a massage. The police discovered that Epstein had allegedly set up a system to recruit girls to give him massages, sometimes engage in sexual activity. And the state attorney's office impaneled a grand jury which indicted Epstein for felony solicitation of a prostitute. In 2008, Epstein ended up pleading guilty to state charges of solicitation and procurement of minors. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, only served 13 months, and most of the time was spent on a work release program. He went to the office, then back to jail at night. And while he had to register as a sex offender, he avoided the more serious federal charges. Those wouldn't come until, a decade later. And Epstein died before he went to trial. According to the New York Times, more than 24 of Epstein's apparent victims have joined a lawsuit charging the FBI with mishandling earlier investigations into his activities and ignoring complaints by victims. Now, another exhibit that was included in Phase 1 of the document release, it may not look like much on its surface because it's fully redacted, But this list, again, entitled masseuses, and with a note saying redacted to protect potential victim information, has 254 line items. So while it's unclear whether any of the names might be repeated, that is a staggering number of potential women and girls who may have been subjected to sexual assault. And then there's the contact list. So this is not, what a lot of people say in the media or on social media, the Epstein list, a list of everybody who's complicit. No, don't even think there's even going to be a list like that. You have to wonder, would that even be kept? However, there have been long rumors of this list kept by Epstein that, maybe documented who his supposed clients or accomplices or alleged accomplices were in connection with a sex trafficking ring. But there has never been any proof of such a list. But the address books belonging to Jeffrey Epstein have been released. And with much more of the personal information, like the addresses and the phone numbers, those are redacted. The names are not. The personal information may be redacted, but not the names. And again, just because a name appears in the contact list doesn't mean that that person committed any sort of crime. But here are just a list of some of the names, some of the more notable names. There's a lot here, but here are the more notable ones. Alec Baldwin, Ralph Fiennes, Michael Jackson, Dr. Henry A. Kissinger, Chris Tucker, Richard Branson, Barbara Walters, Alan Dershowitz, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump, Courtney Love, Rupert Murdoch, David Blaine, Phil Collins, Joan Rivers. The list goes on, but apparently you have, actors, musicians, politicians, wealthy, notable individuals. And of course, Jeffrey Epstein was very well connected, so it's not surprising that he had contact details for all sorts of celebrities and high-profile people. But there are also contacts for properties like Ritz-Carlton's, Aspen Club, Bel Air Hotel, Beverly Wilshire, Cipriani, the Plaza, the Pierre, luxury places that cater to some of the most wealthiest people out there. But now let's talk about the 3-page evidence list that was released on Thursday. This is the first time we have seen this, so this is new. And it catalogs items that were reportedly seized from Epstein's properties in New York and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And it includes things like 4 massage tables, Austrian passport with Epstein photograph, box containing 1 brown bust sculpture of female breasts, 5 costumes and 1 wig, 1 set of copper handcuffs and whip. There were also a myriad of apparent sex toys that were cataloged, as well as bundles of photos and bags containing more than $20,000 in cash. So it does make you wonder if Jeffrey Epstein actually had gone to trial on those federal sex crimes charges, what would have been introduced as evidence and how could this have supported the prosecutor's case? But as retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt noted, some of the most critical evidence against Jeffrey Epstein may be in a digital form. I mean, the evidence list makes reference to things like a CD labeled Girl Pics Nude Book 4, an envelope containing 4 CDs, an envelope containing 1 VHS tape, 2 cassette tapes, 4 micro cassette tapes. So it kind of gives you an idea of how long Epstein's alleged abuse may have been going on. If that's what this digital evidence may contain, evidence might be located on media types that aren't even used nowadays. That's, I think, a fair assumption. We don't know for sure. But multiple newer electronics are also on the list. We have several Apple desktop computers, iPhones, many hard drives. Again, why wasn't all of this released yesterday? Maybe it will be. Something to think about. But there was also, quote, a box containing shredded paper. That's interesting, too. Now, some of the other documentation that we've seen in the past couple of years stems from a lawsuit that was filed by an alleged victim, Virginia Roberts, now goes by Virginia Giuffre. She claims that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell set her up to be assaulted by Prince Andrew. She sued Maxwell for defamation in 2015. The case was settled, but media outlets requested the documents involved in that case be made public. And there was a lot of legal back and forth about which names could be released, what needed to be redacted. And Prince Andrew actually reached an out-of-court settlement with Giuffre in 2022, but the details weren't released. But what happened? A little more than a year ago, Judge Loretta Preska of the Southern District of New York decided that more than 150 names connected to Epstein and Maxwell would, quote, be unsealed in full. And it's important to note that just because a person is named in those documents, again, doesn't implicate them in any sort of misconduct or illegal activity or wrongdoing. They could be friends, acquaintances, employees. But according to the judge's ruling, there were 10 names that would not be made public because they were minor victims whose names have not been publicly revealed before, in interviews or depositions. But the judge detailed the reasoning behind the publication of the names, noting that many had already been mentioned in the media. For others, the substance in question was not salacious. It shouldn't be kept sealed, the ruling said. And we did a whole series of episodes in January of 2024 detailing what came out in that documentation. If you're interested, I encourage you to check them out on Law&Crime's YouTube channel. But the release of the Epstein files Phase 1, it was intended to provide clarity, transparency regarding Epstein's illicit activities and associations. And even though it might not contain, the bombshell information that everybody had been looking for, this is more a symbol of transparency and maybe a preview of what could come out next. So while it might have been considered pretty underwhelming, again, especially given all the public hype around the release, as the investigations continue and more information potentially comes to light, it remains to be seen how these developments will impact the pursuit of justice and the restoration of public trust in the institutions responsible for upholding it. So what comes of all this? Not clear. Maybe if more information is released, it'll put a spotlight on more people, force them to answer some uncomfortable questions now that this conversation is back in the spotlight, back in the news about Jeffrey Epstein. Could criminal charges result? That's a big question, right? Very, very difficult to say. One hand, again, you have an evidentiary issue. Is there even evidence of a crime? Do they have enough? Statute of limitations issues. I will say, we have seen federal charges that could incorporate conduct from years and years ago. So if you're talking about sex trafficking or transporting minors or enticing minors or conspiracy charges. But remember, again, I have to highlight this. Just because a name is mentioned or connected or associated with Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell doesn't mean they are complicit in any alleged illegal activity or have knowledge of anything like that. However, you, me, all of us, we are all in the same boat. We are waiting to see what happens next. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.